worked with several different organizations as a spokesperson for Samaritas, and she also, as I said, is a CEO of her own organization and an avid writer. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over.
Thank you. Is this on? Hello? Can you hear me? All right, thank you so much. Before I get started, I'm going to talk to you guys today about refugees, immigrants, and your own origin stories, and why they matter, and what you can do to make a difference. I've got a lot of material, but I want to hear from you, so I'll try to get through it quickly. But I wanted to start by showing you something that my friend Jen is holding over here. These are brass candlesticks, and there's a tray that matches it. And I light these every Friday night in my house. My great-great-grandmother brought them with her when she left Russia. Now, I don't know if she was a refugee or an immigrant. I actually don't know much about her at all. But I do know that she left her home because she wasn't safe there, because she felt that she was in danger, and she wanted to ensure that future generations, me, my children, my parents, my grandparents, would have a chance at a new life. And that's a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today. So we can go to the next slide. A couple weeks ago, I took my 4 kids, who are all about your ages, to see Hamilton. Anybody seen it? Yeah. Anybody know the music? So there's a song called Yorktown, and there's a line, "Immigrants, we get the job done." And the whole theater in Chicago exploded in cheers and applause. And of course, I'm a very emotional person, and I've been on the forefront of all of this refugee resettlement stuff with my PR business. And I got tears in my eyes because this entire theater of hundreds of people could not be silenced when they heard, "Immigrants, we get the job done." Because this is one of the foundations of our country. As you know, if you know the story of Hamilton, Alexander Hamilton himself was an immigrant from the Caribbean. And a lot of our founding fathers were immigrants or refugees who imagined a better life. In fact, they would give up their lives to win freedom. And all of us probably take that for granted and don't really know what that means. So I wanted to include another favorite quote in the next slide from one of my favorite characters, Dumbledore, about the power of words. Now, I'm a writer. I have 8 books out. I've written thousands of magazine and newspaper articles. And what he said in one of the Harry Potter books was, "Words are our most inexhaustible source of magic, capable of both inflicting injury and remedying it." I'm in the business of telling stories that make the world a better place. And I'll tell you a little bit about that in the next slide. So, I am a writer, an educator. I teach writing, not in a school. I get to be the fun teacher that comes in and brings new things and then leaves. I don't have to do discipline or anything like that. And I'm an entrepreneur. I've been lucky enough to work for myself since 1998, which is a really cool thing. It's no small thing either. I have a company called Your People. It's a public relations company, and that's the role in which I help Samaritas, which I'll tell you about in a few minutes. But before that, I spent 15 years as a journalist for magazines and newspapers, and I've been published all over the country. And I have 8 books. And in the top right corner, you see the cover of my most recent book, which was published in 2013. It's called The Flavors of Faith, Holy Breads. And it's about how every community and every faith has a bread, and there are recipes and stories, and that's all nice. But everybody's favorite chapter in there is the one about the Islamic Council of America, Islamic Center of America in Dearborn, and the breads that women there have been baking for a quarter century, bringing in $250,000 in revenue every year from the bread sales. And the reason that it was everybody's favorite chapter is because I went there as a Jewish woman into this mosque and found all these similarities. And I wrote about it in that chapter. And that's what I've done my whole career, is write about all the ways in which we are similar and have common ground. So in 2007, when journalism was changing drastically, I started my company, Your People, and we do what's called public relations. Anybody know what that is? It actually is a lot more fun than I thought it would be when I started, but I was a little bit afraid being a journalist. So if we go to the next slide, I'll tell you a little bit about it. Technically speaking, public relations is relationships with key publics, which means who do you need to connect to in order to achieve your goals? So nonprofits, organizations, companies hire me, even entrepreneurs, startups, and they ask me, what do I need to do to tell people that I exist and to get new customers? And I'm very selective about which customers I'll take on. I only have between 5 and 7 clients at a time. And we believe, and we've seen this been proven time and time again, that the way that you succeed in anything is with 3 things. Higher purpose, meaning you actually care about making the world a better place. You want to do well and do good. Storytelling, so you need to know what words to use to connect with others. And strategic relationships. Who do you need to engage with in a mutually beneficial way in order to achieve your goal and theirs? And that's how I go about public relations. Go to the next slide. So on the right side here are some of the clients that I work with. And you'll see in the top right corner, my right, Samaritas. That was formerly Lutheran Social Services of Michigan. Last year they rebranded. And they've been my biggest client for about 5 or 6 years. They do a lot of things. They do foster care and adoption. They do work with seniors, people with disabilities, affordable living communities, and refugee resettlement. It is the largest refugee resettling agency in Michigan and the 4th largest in the nation. On the left side of this, no, let's go back. On the left side of the screen, you'll see some of the icons of the media outlets that I have worked with. Now, public relations is not just getting people in the media. It's a lot of that, and that's what I'm going to talk about, but there's so much more. It's things like this. This is public relations, because I'm telling you a story, and I'm hoping that in some way you'll help me and I'll help you. And I do this for clients, like when I do press conferences and other kinds of events. But I will tell you a little bit about some of the ways that I've told the stories for Samaritas in the media to achieve their goals. So now we can go to the next slide. So Samaritas Refugee Resettlement has been renamed New American Services because words matter. So when they rebranded, rather than Refugee Resettlement, it's a nice alliteration there with the R's, but it's a little bit amorphous and people don't know what it is. But New American Services is very optimistic and hopeful, so those words do make a difference. These are some pictures from times that we welcomed refugees into the airport. And they have been resettling refugees since after World War II. So you can imagine that after World War II, refugees were Jewish, Polish, Russian, anybody who in some way was displaced due to the Second World War. In the 50s, people who were displaced because of the Korean conflict. In the 70s, from Vietnam. In the 90s, Samaritas welcomed a lot of Bosnian refugees, some of whom I've had the great fortune to get to know, who have not only built new lives, built companies, and now employ tons of refugees and immigrants here. So they're building our economy. As they said, immigrants, we get the job done. And now, in the past 15 or so years, even a little bit longer, a lot of the refugees that Samaritas has welcomed to Michigan are from the Middle East, because that's a great source of conflict these days. They have offices in Troy and also in Grand Rapids and Battle Creek. And there are ways that you guys could get involved if you wanted to. Not only does Samaritas welcome refugees when they come at the airport, find them places to live, jobs, help their kids enroll in school, even learn little things like how to read the mail. You know, we know that if we get a big sweepstakes that says we won $1 million, it's probably garbage. People don't know that from other cultures. There's lots of little ways that we can help people become acclimated to American society. There's also a school impact program for kids that are refugees who are getting used to our schools here. They look for mentors and friends who can take them under their wing, help them learn English, and help them get adjusted to life in America. Next slide. So I'm using the words refugee and immigrant kind of interchangeably, although they're really not. At some point they do merge, but a refugee is somebody who seeks safety. They feel like they're in danger in their home and they can't stay. They often leave in a hurry. They can't take a lot with them. They have a dangerous journey when they do leave, and you'll hear about some of those. And they'll go anywhere that they're taken, and it often takes a long time before they're accepted. There are, at this point, 65.3 million displaced persons in the world. That's according to the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees. 1% receive the official designation refugee. They have to apply to be considered a refugee, and they go through a lot of screening at the UN level, and then if they're going to come here, our level, 7 federal agencies check them out before they're ever granted asylum in the US. So refugees go through some of the worst traumas in the world and are the most vetted people you will ever see admitted to this country. And by the way, there has never been a terrorist in the United States who was a refugee. There's no research to show that. They're all homegrown. Immigrants make a choice. They have time. They say, you know what, I'd like to go work for Ford, so I'm going to move to Detroit, and I'm going to go through all the channels and apply for a visa. There are tons of immigrants in our city and in our country. They're very different, their experiences. But ultimately, both refugees and immigrants have unbelievable success because they really want to do well. They don't want to be a burden on anyone. They just want a chance at freedom. So we find that 75% of the refugees that Samaritas welcomes to Michigan are self-sufficient within 180 days of arrival. That's 6 months. Most don't even speak English at that point, and yet they don't need any government assistance in 6 months. I don't know if we can say the same for most Americans, right? Immigrants are disproportionately entrepreneurs in this country because they're hungry and they strive to prove that they belong here. So I want to ask you to think about, when did your family come here and why? Because most Americans can trace their roots to some other place. Next slide. So why do we tell stories? For Samaritas, and that's what I'm going to focus on right now, the intent is to tell positive stories when there's a lot of negativity out there and show the benefits of refugee resettlement. So I think we all know we have a little bit of a tense political time these days, and that started a couple years ago, or maybe longer ago than that, but in earnest, a lot of the political rhetoric around refugees and immigrants got really loud in 2015. And so at that time, as the largest resettling agency in the state, it was our responsibility to say, okay, let's educate people. Let's show them a different perspective. Let's try to persuade opinion so that we can succeed in helping people who need our help. There's a couple ways that I've done that. The first is an op-ed. Anybody know what an op-ed is? Yeah? What is it? Yeah, opinion editorial. So it's a piece that any of you could write. Very impressive. Any of you could write an op-ed. In fact, newspapers and websites are hungry for op-eds every single day. They publish pieces on a daily basis, multiple pieces, and they're looking for experts who have a perspective that nobody else does. So I helped my client, I actually write the pieces, and then it's somebody else's byline. In 2015, you guys listening? Governor Snyder made a comment, I don't know if anybody remembers this, but he said, I'm not gonna let any more refugees in Michigan. Anybody hear that? And everybody got all upset. Some people said, oh my gosh, you have to let them in. And other people said, yeah, way to go. And the reality is that the governor has no control over whether refugees come to his state or not. It's a federal thing. So here was all this political conversation happening, and people got scared, and refugees themselves said, oh my gosh, will my relatives be able to come? And it was all misinformation. And we're not getting it into talk about alternative facts, but I wrote a piece that was published in the Detroit Free Press in November 2015, explaining that it's a federal thing, how vetted refugees are, and why it is in our best interest to welcome them. Fast forward a year, and we had an election, and we won't even go into that either, but when we had a change of administration, there were a lot of questions and concerns about the future of refugee resettlement. Every single administration comes in and issues executive orders and makes changes. It's standard. And most of them put a halt on refugee resettlement for a period of time to sort of look at the process and make educated decisions. And sometimes they change the numbers or the details. That all happened, and we're going to get to that in a minute. But we wrote an op-ed in November of 2016 about refugee children, because there are youth who come without any parents. And the reason they come without parents is because they've seen their parents be murdered in front of them, or they ran when rebels came into their village for safety because their parents said, go and save yourself, and they were alone. And they travel to wherever they can get to and ask an adult for help and end up somewhere like here. So we wrote a piece about why it's imperative for America to not shut the door on refugee children. Pretty important topic, right? I cannot even imagine what that could be like. Let's go to the next slide. So a couple other ways that we have that I help tell stories is with press conferences and interviews. And I'm going to tell you about 3 wonderful people that I have met, families that I've met in this process. The first one was the Syrian Scientist, as he became known, Mr. Hamo. And he was reported, and there were beautiful pictures and narrative on Humans of New York, a blog that I'm sure you guys might know about, in 2015. And his family, he had 5 children and a wife. They lived in these beautiful tall high-rises in Syria. He's a PhD scientist, affluent family, educated. Lots of family lived in the same neighborhood, and their home was bombed. They think by government, we don't know, but it was decimated. His wife was killed in the bomb attacks, and one of his children. So he and his surviving 4 children fled to Turkey, where they stayed for 2 years until they received asylum in America. And the Humans of New York blogs ran to wide global acclaim in the fall of 2015, and then we found out at Samaritas, which was Lutheran Social Services at the time, that they were coming here. So we decided, with all this rhetoric, right after Governor Snyder made a statement, to hold a press conference, which is the blue table at the top. And you see the middle picture is him and his son arriving at the airport, and then that's the translator with the microphone. And he arrived on December 17th, 2015, at about 10 o'clock at night, after traveling from Turkey to Chicago and then a layover to Detroit, so you can imagine how tired he was. And he still very generously greeted media. I allowed 5 local journalists to ask a question because I knew that I didn't want to take advantage of his exhaustion and disarray in coming to a new place, but at least to have the chance of meeting somebody and hearing his story, because the only way we understand these issues is by sharing our words and seeing a human face on it. It's not just refugee resettlement, it's this man and this family, and who didn't come because they were killed. And the other thing that I did was I allowed one journalist that I have a great relationship with, Laura Berman, to meet with him the next day when he was arrested and do a cover story on the Detroit News, which was her farewell piece before she retired in 2015. And so those strategic stories that, because of my relationships, we shared in a trustworthy way, really changed the rhetoric and the face on this story of refugee resettlement. Let's go to the next one. The next family that I love is the Zeusie family. They live in Dearborn. They were the first Syrian family to come in 2015. And they have 4 children. They actually will have 5 in May, the first American-born child. They arrived and they had lived in a small town near the border of Jordan. They fled and were there for about 2 years before they received asylum. And the only person who's interviewed them is Neil Rubin from the Detroit News, another good friend of mine, and a strategic decision to give him an exclusive story. So the first one was in June of 2015 about who are the Syrians coming to Detroit? Let's meet them. Let's hear about their experience so we can understand this civil war here in America. And then he revisited it in this past fall because he wanted to know, and a lot of media people wanted to know, how do people who came here from somewhere else feel about all of these changes in our political landscape? And what he found was, and I love this family, the kids just hug me when I go there. Their older son has a lot of special needs, couldn't walk, could barely communicate. They had no support in Syria. And they came here and he's walking and he's communicating, and it's amazing. They are a Muslim family and they celebrated Halloween, and they even had a Christmas tree, and they said it's because we are American now and we need to observe what American society observes and be respectful, and they're so proud to be here. Let's go to the next one. My favorite is Nidal, who is this sweet, sweet man who lives in Bloomfield Hills. He's about 30, and he is a brilliant guy who was a farmer and a beekeeper in Syria. His parents and his brother still live on the farm in Syria, and he sold his honey all over in farmers markets and has this passion for agriculture. So his goal is to master English and go to Michigan State and become, as he says, a professor of bees and open a restaurant and do all kinds of things here. He has 2 little kids, but when he left, he had only the daughter. She was 1.5 years. And the reason that he left was because he participated in a peaceful protest in his village. He didn't say a word. He was with a lot of other people, and they held simply one single flower, each of them. And he was jailed for a week and tortured because of it. When he got out of jail, he was very concerned for the future of his family and their safety. And so he had to make the very precarious decision to leave with his wife and baby daughter along a road. It was about a distance between here and Windsor, so you can imagine it's not that far, but to walk there would be a little bit of a journey. But the road is littered with bodies because the government bombs the road routinely so that people won't leave. And they had to make the decision to try and to hope that they got to the other side alive, which thank God they did, where they waited in Jordan with relatives until they received welcome in the United States, and they came in the summer of 2015. He is amazing, and he is my poster child when Rolling Stone magazine called. I wasn't going to say no, and he did the interview, and so there's a beautiful story that I coordinated in Rolling Stone, and another one in US News and World Report about Nidal's journey and why he's so proud to be here. Let's go to the next. The point of all of this is to educate, and so when we have something like an executive order that comes out and it drastically changes the landscape of welcoming people in this country, we have to tell people to advocate for what we believe is right or wrong. I believe that this country was founded on the concept of freedom and welcome, being a safe haven for people who have nowhere else to go. And if you look around, you know that our country is a melting pot of people from all different origins, all different abilities and belief systems. And I personally don't want to see that change, which is why I continue to tell these stories. But if we skip ahead a little, I want to get in 2 minutes about, let's go a little, One Earth Writing is one thing I just want to mention, because I work with people like you guys. So this is my nonprofit that I started last year. It's called One Earth Writing, and the reason I created it was to work with teenagers from 7th grade through 12th grade in writing workshops to bring people together across racial, religious, and socioeconomic divides, because I believe that the adults that are running our world right now are a little misguided. And I do believe that if we each have the opportunity to hear and see stories of other people, we will find, like I found when I went to that mosque and baked bread with the grandmothers there who were just like my grandmother, that we are so much more the same than we are different. So with One Earth Writing, there are opportunities for you guys to get involved and become leaders, to meet other teens who like to write. So if you like to write, I want to see you. And really understand the common points in our stories, because I'm counting on all of you in the future to change the way we live. Now, do you have any questions? Because I think I have like 3 minutes. So anything you want to ask me?
How do you feel about the travel ban? Like that?
The travel ban?
Yeah.
Well, it has been proven to be unconstitutional because it targets a particular religion. I don't think it's very American. I think it's based on fear and misinformation, and I think it's misguided. For those of you who don't know, President Trump's executive order changed the number of refugees that we will accept. So President Obama had changed this year's amounts to 110,000, and Trump has reduced that to 50,000, and we've already welcomed about 36,000. So in the remainder of this year, which ends, the fiscal year ends in September, we can welcome another 14,000. Think about those numbers, guys. There are 65.3 million displaced persons in the world. 1% of that qualify as refugees, and we're only going to welcome 50,000 here? Doesn't make any sense. Yes?
In one of your first slides, you said you were a spiritual entrepreneur, and I was wondering what you meant by that.
So I believe a lot in higher purpose, and that we all have a role to play in the world. I believe that we're here to make a difference and to make the world better than we found it when we got here. And I put that into everything that I do. So I will not work with anybody who doesn't have a sense of higher purpose. If people just want to make money, I'm not the PR person for them. It's about making the world better and connecting people. Yes? Other questions? Anyone?
Do you think the Trump wall would be effective?
I'm sorry?
Do you think the Trump wall would be effective?
The wall?
Yeah.
I don't think that walls are effective. I think that they prevent us from really knowing our neighbors, and I don't think that that's a long-term solution. I'll tell you guys one last story before I finish. So So you all know about the airport protest that happened after the first executive order, right? So my husband and I and my daughter and a friend of hers went to the airport protest, and it was an amazing experience just because it was really the face of America. It was all different races, religions, everything, and it was, I thought, incredible and motivating. And we took a shuttle because we parked off-site. So on the way back, we were on the shuttle, just the four of us, and everybody else on the shuttle was white, and they were travelers, and they had not participated in the protest, and they were all complaining about those protesters. They're ruining everything. Now, to be fair, they may not have agreed with the political stance, and after you've had a long journey, the last thing you want is to battle crowds chanting, "No ban, no wall." So I understand. But they were grumbling, and I was on this high from protesting, and I was listening to them in the captive audience of the shuttle. And I finally, since I know so much about the details of the executive order, and people mostly spout off on things they don't know anything about, I had to speak up. And so I said in this captive audience, and they had nowhere to go, so poor passengers, I said, every single one of you, unless you are Native American, came from somewhere else. I said, so don't sit here and complain about refugees and immigrants. And they all sort of got quiet, and they looked at me. And one man said, very quietly, well, we were legal immigrants. And I said, how do you know? I just showed you guys the candlesticks that my great-grandmother brought. I have no clue if she came here legally or illegally. I don't know if she was running for her life or she did it with time and space. I have no idea. All I know is that I'm grateful that I'm alive. If she hadn't left Russia when she did, my people would have died in the Holocaust. And that is so true for so many people. And nobody else said a word on that shuttle because they knew that there was a point there. So whatever our politics are, there is a way to share our stories so that we can find that common ground, because at the end of the day, we all want the same thing.
For your project, do you think that younger teens are noticing the awareness that has been spreading and collaborating with each other to really spread the idea of social problems? Yeah, so like this project, for example, are teens really collaborating with each other to spread the injustice issues that people are facing when coming into the country?
Yes. So I will tell you that I've worked with kids from 7th grade up to 12th grade, and I am blown away that when people are put together in a creative setting and they can actually be accepted for who they are, so there's none of the pressure that we have in school, none of the social media stuff dogging us. We're just sitting around a table and saying, we're reading a poem, or we're writing something, or we're writing an op-ed to publish, and realizing that every single voice matters and that each of you is an expert in something and can inform everybody else for the betterment of society, then yes, they really make a huge impact. And honestly, while the 7th and 8th graders I work with are not as mature as you guys, they've got a lot of energy, and they're just tasting what it is to have some of that strength and independence, and they're running with it. So I say yes. Any other questions? Do you have any else?
Okay.